all the controversy surrounding Israel and Palestine, it's time that we all get better understanding of ancient Israel and modern day Israel. Hi, I'm Ron. We decided to do this podcast because people just don't know what's going on, and they are forming opinions and taking actions without a good understanding of the history of Israel. My guest, Dave Martin, is not only a student at Los Angeles City College, he's also a passionate student about the nation of Israel. He's also taught about Israel from a biblical perspective for a number of years. Dave, thanks for joining us today to share the history of ancient and modern day Israel.
Yeah,
Let's
thank
dive
you.
right in.
Thank you.
Here are some questions that someone might ask about modern and ancient Israel. Here's one. What were the key historical events in ancient Israel's history?
Well, when Moses brought the Israelites out of Egypt, that was one. Then when Joshua led the Israelites into the land of Canaan for the first time, that's another. When they received the Ten Commandments at Mount Sinai, that's another. Oh, let's not forget worshiping the golden calf. When Moses was given the instructions by the Lord to construct the temple and all the temple instruments, and going back to Joshua, so it took them 5 years to conquer the land of Canaan. The first place they conquered was the city of Jericho. And things went well when Joshua was alive, but after he died, then the Israelites, they wandered off into idol worship. And that's what the book of Judges is all about. How God would raise up these judges to bring his people back to them. But when the judge died, they just went back to their idol worshiping ways, and it just became more and more of a mess as time went on. Eventually, the nation was split into northern and southern sections. The northern kingdom, as it's called, had no good kings, and they went off into Assyrian captivity in 722 BC, and the southern kingdom had some great kings, some mediocre kings, and then some just awful kings. And they went off into Babylonian captivity in 586 BC. And 50,000 of those that were taken off into Babylonian captivity came back 70 years later. They're the ones that were responsible for building a second temple, as the first one was destroyed, along with the city of Jerusalem by the Babylonians. Then they set up the altar, and they repaired the city walls. So that's just kind of like an oversight of what happened to Israel over several hundred years.
They also received the Ten Commandments sometime during that?
Yeah, after they came out of Egypt,
Okay.
Moses received the Ten Commandments.
Okay. Well, how did the ancient Israelites practice their religion?
Well, first they had a tabernacle. That's the instructions that God gave Moses on Mount Sinai. The instructions to build a tabernacle and the tabernacle instruments, and then all these different sacrifices. There was peace offerings, offerings for sin, offerings for thankfulness. Oh, just so many. I can't even think of them all. But it all started with a tabernacle. And that was the central place of worship for hundreds of years until Solomon built the first temple. And the same rules still apply. If the temple was there for sacrifices, and just like during the tabernacle era, the men, not the women, but the men would gather at the tabernacle, later the temple, 3 times a year for Passover, which is next week. And then they would come for Shavuot, the beginning of the harvest. And then they would gather for Sukkot. This is where, that's the end of the harvest. This is where they would build booths, and they would live in these booths for a whole week. It was a reminder to the Israelites of their wilderness wanderings.
What role did kings like David and Solomon play in shaping ancient Israel?
Well, David was the one responsible for capturing the city of Jerusalem. Actually, it was called the City of David, and they just filled out from there. And eventually it became the city that you see today. After he died, his son Solomon became king. And Solomon is the one that was responsible for building the first temple.
Was Jerusalem called Jebusites?
It was a Jebusite city.
Okay. Seem to remember that when I went there.
In the book of Judges, Jerusalem is mentioned, but it's not an Israelite city yet. It's a Jebusite city.
Okay.
It would become Israel's capital until David conquered the city. And also, after he conquered the city, Jerusalem never left the control of from Israel. Israel, it was always a part of Israel's history, nobody else's history.
How did ancient Israel interact with neighboring civilizations like Egypt and Mesopotamia?
Well, they really weren't supposed to intermingle with any nations around them because God wanted his people to be separate from the nations around them. Now, there were times, especially when those evil kings were coming at, or those evil kings were on the throne, and other nations were coming after them. Yeah, they would reach out for help from surrounding neighbors, but it always came to nothing. Because, see, again, God didn't want his people to mingle with other people from other nations. And, like, say, in the instance of Ahaz did reach out to the Egyptians. Oh no, maybe it was either he reached out to a group of people from other nations, but it didn't go anywhere. Zedekiah did too. It didn't go anywhere because God was going to use the Babylonians specifically to chastise Israel, and he was not going to allow the nation to be delivered by these foreign entities. But right from the very beginning, when Moses brought the Israelites out from Egypt, God told him, I do not want you mingling with these other nations. I don't want you giving your sons to their daughters and taking their daughters for your sons, because they would learn their ways and their practices, and they would draw the Israelites away from God, which is what happened with Solomon. He had 1,000 wives, and eventually they drew him away from God, and he started worshiping all these false gods, even building idols to these false gods. And God said, no. He said, I'm bringing you out to be a separate, sanctified people. But did they listen? No, they didn't listen. You know, they were bound and determined that they were going to do their own thing. Even in the book of Numbers, Balaam, remember 24,000 Israelites were killed in one day because they started going after the women from the nations around them, the Moabite women. And God said, no, no, you're not supposed to do this. And bingo, just like that, he killed 24,000. But who was responsible for leading those people astray? It was Balaam.
Sent by Balak.
Yep, sent by Balak to curse the Israelites. So since that didn't work, I guess Balaam thought, well, there is one way I can trip these people up.
Right.
I'll just lead them off to start having sex with these women and doing all this other stuff that is not right. And God said, nope, not having it.
If I remember, they executed Balaam too.
Yep,
For
they did.
sorcery or something.
Balak and Balaam
Yep.
both fell by the sword.
They got them both.
But you know, I was going to say, that's what happens. What was Balaam doing when Balak asked him to curse Israel? That's what he was doing. He was cursing Israel, and in Genesis 12:3 says, I will bless them that bless thee, and curse them that curse thee. So Balaam brought a curse on himself.
Yes.
So did Balak.
Probably the Moabites too.
Oh, well, the Moabite. Well, Balaam even told Balak, hey, listen, this is what's going to happen to some of these surrounding nations. And you know what? They don't even exist anymore. Listen, like a lot of these nations that conquered Israel at one time, or were their enemies, they don't exist anymore. Where's the Moabite? Where's the Moabites? The Amorites, okay, the Jebusites,
Hittites.
and the Hittites, and all those 7 nations that God told Abraham, his descendants, would conquer. They don't exist anymore. The Philistines, they don't exist. So the Babylonians, they don't exist. The Medo-Persians, they don't exist. Now the Egyptians still exist. Greece still exists, and we know Rome still exists. But they're just mere shadows of what they used to be. They're civilizations, their great empires are in ruins, dust. And where's Israel? Still there, still thriving, still growing, And one of the most technologically advanced Middle Eastern countries.
Right. One of the only ones, probably.
Yep, one of the only ones.
So, what are the significant archaeological discoveries related to ancient Israel?
Oh, there's so many. Obviously, Jerusalem, that's probably the biggest and best. Right.
City of David.
Yep, City of David.
Yeah.
Still finding things there.
Yes.
Elah, where David and Goliath
Mhm.
had their showdown.
Mhm.
Ziklag, where David hid from Saul
Mhm.
for 18 months before he became king and before Saul and his sons were killed on Mount Gilboa by the Philistines. So I went online, I looked up Mount Gilboa, and it pretty much looks like it did when Saul and his sons were slain on it. Nothing's changed there. Still rocks, strewn with rocks. Just whatever grows there, whatever shrubbery grows there. There's no modern city built on it or anything. So, it must be, is it in the Negev? Is Mount Gilboa in the Negev?
I'm not sure.
The desert?
I don't know. We didn't go there.
Oh,
We went to Megiddo.
yeah, Megiddo.
Yeah, that's in the Jezreel Valley.
Yeah, Armageddon. What other places have they found? Oh, they found where the Philistines made their last stand against the Israelis.
They're Alamo.
Yeah, their Alamo.
Mm-hmm.
They found a Philistine grave site.
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember which city. Now those five Philistine cities that are along the Mediterranean,
Mm-hmm.
they still exist,
Right.
except they're modern cities now, but they still
Gath and one.
go by the names that they went by thousands of years ago.
Yeah.
But yeah, they found a Philistine grave site. So we know the Philistines actually existed now. That they weren't just thrown into the story to make it more interesting. So we know for a fact now that David actually did
Mm-hmm.
fight
Yes.
these people called the Philistines, and he fought the Philistines all during his 40-year reign as king.
Mm-hmm.
But Solomon, his son, was different. His kingdom was marked with peace, which is why he had so many wives. Because back then, when you married a woman from another country, you were in essence telling her father, who was the king, hey, I want peace with you, so I'm going to marry one of your daughters.
Did he marry Queen of Sheba?
No.
No.
That's just, people need to look into the facts.
Right. Right.
It doesn't say anything like
Right.
that.
Right.
And it also says that when the Queen of Sheba came to ask Solomon all those questions, she went back to her homeland.
Oh, yeah,
I don't
right.
see where Solomon was traipsing behind her.
Right.
He stayed in Israel. She went back to wherever she came from,
Mm-hmm.
which now some people think she came from Egypt, which is probably true. She probably did.
Mm-hmm.
Or somewhere in Africa, but I'll take Egypt.
Mm-hmm.
And the only reason I say Egypt because Egypt is a fascinating place. So
Yes. Mm-hmm. Okay. How did the Babylonian exile impact the culture and religion of ancient Israel?
well, before the Israelis went into Babylonian captivity,
Mm-hmm.
they were idol worshippers.
Mm-hmm.
When they came back from their captivity, now not all of them came back. Only 50,000 came back at first. There were more that went back later, but the initial group was 50,000. And you can read about their exploits in the book of Ezra and Nehemiah. But when they came back, they were not idol worshipers anymore. But they did other things. They married foreign wives.
Yeah.
And they had to be rebuked for that.
And their children were
And
speaking both languages or whatever. They couldn't even speak Hebrew.
And the kids couldn't even speak Hebrew.
Right.
They were speaking all the languages of these foreign countries. And so, guess who led them into that? The religious leaders. Yeah. So it's no joke. You know, when God says he wants faithfulness, he wants faithfulness. And faithfulness doesn't mean you just go off and do your own thing. See, that was the whole problem with Israel to begin with. Their religious leaders are the ones that led them astray. You know, notice the message of Isaiah, Ezekiel, Jeremiah, right? They were constantly preaching out against the religious leaders because it was their responsibility to make sure that they did what God wanted them to do. But instead of doing that, guess what they did? They said, well, we're just going to, do our own thing. You can worship any way you want. It doesn't matter. And they certainly didn't try to stop it, right? They just kept leading the nation more and more and more into debauchery until it ended up where they were sacrificing their own children to Molech.
Well, you mentioned the prophets. What were the major prophets of ancient Israel and their message?
Well, there was Isaiah, starting with Isaiah. Okay, then there was Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Daniel, and Hosea, the one that married the prostitute. Because it was like a picture story to Israel. Hey man, you've strayed from me. The Lord said, you've strayed from me. You're the whore. Because you're going off and you're marrying all these, shall we say, foreign ideas, worshiping these idols. And God said, so what? Your idol worshiping ways, that's like marrying another wife.
Right.
A whore. But he said, what? Come back to me. So see, God never gave up on Israel. Never, ever. And that's basically what Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and Daniel is considered a major prophet, but he more or less prophesied to the kings of Babylon. He did his message, well, I guess it was. The first 9 chapters or 8 chapters of Daniel were written in Aramaic because it dealt with what was going to happen not only in Babylon, but those kingdoms, those 4 earthly kingdoms. And then the last 4 chapters of Daniel were written in Hebrew because now it included Israel. So he first prophesied to the heathen, and then he prophesied to his own people, or wrote about his own people and what they were going to, and their part, their role in the future and what was going to happen. But Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel all prophesied to their own people, and message was basically the same.
Mhm.
Repent.
Yeah.
Jeremiah was constantly saying, amend your ways
Mhm.
and your doings. But where did he say that a lot of the times? The temple. Because it was the religious leaders that were responsible for keeping the people in line and for doing what God wanted them to do. But they didn't want to. Isaiah too, you know? But these people didn't want to do what God wanted them
Now, if I remember, Zedekiah was a king.
last
And
king.
Jeremiah, and Jeremiah was the last prophet before they went into exile, and he was in jail when they were when they broke into the city,
Yeah,
and they let him go.
exactly. But Zedekiah was,
They let him go.
exactly. Yeah, the rest of the people were marched off into Babylonian captivity. Jeremiah was the only one that was
Yeah.
let go. But Zedekiah, you know what? He paid a heavy price for his disobedience. And even Jeremiah said, hey, listen, if you do this, nothing's going to happen to you. But he didn't want to listen. So not only did he lose his sons, but he lost his sight too.
Yeah. He was listening to his military leaders.
Yeah. Well, listen, if your leaders are practicing debauchery, what are the common people going to do? Who do they follow? They follow their leaders. So if your leaders are corrupt,
Right.
that just goes to stand you're going to have a corrupt nation.
And even one of their prophets, Hananiah, remember him?
Yeah.
Remember, he died exactly like Jeremiah said, in 1 year you're going to be dead.
Oh, right. Yep.
So his false prophet.
Of his false prophet, yeah. Telling people everything's going to be okay. We're going to come back here in 2 years. And yeah, the temple instruments are all going to be returned, blah, 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 blah. And the people, see, they wanted to listen to a lie, but they didn't want to listen to the truth. Because the lie sounded much more convenient. Oh, we don't want to hear that. We're going to go off into Babylonian captivity for the next 70 years.
This is the last one, and we're by up around 25 minutes. How was society structured in ancient Israel, including family, tribes, and governments?
Well, they were actually structured into 12 tribes. Now, I don't have my Bible. Let's see. Well, let's see. There was the tribe of Benjamin, Zebulun, Issachar, Judah, Manasseh,
Reuben.
yeah, Reuben, Asher,
Ephraim.
oh no,
No, that wasn't us.
oh, Levites,
Levites.
Dan,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that might be 12. But yeah, they were actually structured into 12 different tribes, and from those tribes, each of them acquired their own portion of land inside Israel. Now, before they entered into Israel, the tribes were allocated.
Mm-hmm.
So Benjamin had so many people in his tribe, Judah had so many people in his tribe, and so on and so forth. So when they got into the land of Israel, or the land of Canaan, as it was known then,
Mm-hmm.
then they just allocated different portions of the land of Canaan to each tribe, except for the Levites, who got no land, but they did get 48 cities.
So, Dave, thank you for Well, we covered a lot, but it's not even the tip of the iceberg for ancient Israel. But it's the main points, and it's a lot to consider and give people something to think about before they run off and start spreading propaganda that's not true. They need to look at ancient Israel, where it came from, and stop saying all this from driving into the city or where they need to know. They've been there all along, all this time. There's archaeological evidence, even the Dead Sea Scrolls, all this stuff, it's their land. They've been there all this time. So thank you for covering that. Good way.
Thank you.